Oh, yeah. Get into that mood now, people. Come on. Oh, yes. How are you doing? How are you all doing? Man, I hope you're doing awesome. Hope you're all doing great. Keep vibing here for a minute. Let's get into it. Come on. This is Runar by Dunheim. Shout out Dunheim. Come on. Woo! And that is what I'm talking about. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another Random Heathen Ramblings podcast. Hope your week has been great. Hope your weekend was all right, and hope you're ready to do it all over again. Thanks for joining me today. Got a special guest coming up here in just a minute or two or three. Depends on how long I filibuster, as they say in the industry. But figured I'd just, go through the motions, go through the whole introduction. You guys know the drill. If you are not yet following my podcast on, all kinds of platforms now. I'm on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, I think Breaker, also now on Stitcher. Spotify, of course. I think I mentioned that. If I didn't, I just did. Anchor. So wherever you're listening from, if you're not following the podcast and you're not keeping track of things, now's your opportunity to please follow, upvote, do whatever it is that the podcast listening platform of your choice prompts you and allows you to do. Of course, you can always call into the Midgard Musings hotline and be featured here on a future Random Heathen Ramblings podcast. Calling in is the phone lines are always open. I will listen to your message and feature you at a later time. That number is 615-671-9832. So let's go ahead and start our intro for the show. Midgard Musings podcast, practicing the old ways in modern times. And today's episode is going to be a fun one. I think got a really fun guest coming. So here we go. Let's get into it. All right. Good stuff. So again, thank you all again for listening today. If you're watching this on the YouTube premiere, hail and welcome to you. Good day, good Thursday, good Thursday to all of yous out there all over the world. And if you're watching the live YouTube premiere and appreciate it. If you want to catch these YouTube videos after they premiere, then you're going to need to become a YouTube channel member. So I know a lot of folks like watching these types of things. For whatever reason, but if YouTube is your streaming or listening platform of choice, then by all means consider becoming a channel member. And to all my channel members that listen and watch, there's I'm trying to get back into finding a more wholesome cadence for me to do those live streams that we started doing a while back. We didn't really get very far off the ground with those things, but they need to come back, because that's what, a lot of my YouTube channel members are looking for, is that kind of personal interaction with myself to talk about all things heathenry, in like a one-on-one sort of deal. But that is something that's going to be coming back very soon. I know I keep saying that, and things just keep coming up. So this past weekend, I'm probably going to talk a little bit more about this once my guest, his name is, we'll just go by Neif. Neif will be coming on, probably talk a little bit about this, just to get some discussion and some circulation of conversation. But he's going to be talking a bit today. We're going to be talking a bit about things pertaining to like tribalism. He's not a heathen, but he lives by what he refers to and calls as Tundra law. Yes, Tundra law. So we're going to talk about we're going to talk a bit when he comes on here about Tundra law and how that translates into maybe heathen worldviews and some of the nuances or similarities, between all those sorts of things. So we're going to be talking a bit about that. But yeah, no, this past weekend had a really nice time with another local tribe leader here in the Nashville area. His name is Greg, and he is the chieftain of the Raven Moon Hearth, based out of Nashville. Got a lot of great people there, but Greg's a wonderful guy. Known him for several years now, and he's actually been part of the tribe that I am a part of. Our tribe's name is Heathen folk, and he has been a part of our tribe's Yule rituals for the last several years. We're still very small. We don't do a whole lot of public events or anything right now, and especially with the whole COVID mess and public events, being kind of shut down there for a little bit, or limited in their cadence or just ease of being able to do it. But he's been doing a lot of really cool stuff and over the years, and he actually has or their tribe, their group has a public event that recurs every year. They have a couple, but they have one coming up in next month, actually, not too long from now. It's called Shadow Moot. So if you're in the area, and I know people like to travel for some things, but if you want more details and you want to know more about it, I will link it down in the description, and I will also put it in the podcast show notes. For those of you that are listening, that are not watching, that are like, what are you talking about, the description? Well, it's going to be in the show notes. The event details of Shadow Moot. It is a public event, in-person event. So please be safe and please be considerate of the hosts and the guests around you, should you decide to attend. But the event details will be on a Facebook platform. I'll also try to be sure to include any external methods, but they pretty much do everything through the Facebook social media platform. So if you're not on there, I don't know what to tell you. I don't have any, at least at this point. If I find anything and it's in the show notes, then I found it. Or if it's down in the description, then I found it. But aside from that, that's where you can find all those things. And as always, support your local heathen groups, whether they be artisans, crafts, men or women, or craftspeople, and anybody that's out here, doing things to help the larger heathen community as a whole. For instance, like myself here, Midgard Musings, the subscribing to the platforms that you listen or watch on, so subscribe to the channel, follow or upvote the podcasts. If you want to become a channel member, you can do that. You can also become a patron to Midgard Musings on Patreon. All that's going to be in the details in the Linktree link that you see in the show notes or down in the description. And what else? Oh yeah, merchandise. There's a Midgard Musings store. Again, all that's going to be linked in the Linktree. So I got t-shirts, hoodies, stuff for men, women, children, even infants. Need to go through there and try to boost the store. There's a lot of cool stuff, just different color t-shirts, but it's got the Midgard Musings buying room that you see up here, and I want to add some more apparel variety and whatnot to that. So, but yeah, let's go ahead and welcome in Neif today. So let's get him in here and see what he has to say about just various things. Like I said, he's not heathen, doesn't practice heathenry, but he's a good dude. Love hanging around him. So let's go ahead and bring him in here and get him introduced to everyone and anyone. So here we go. Yeah, all right, folks. So we got a third guest here that I didn't tell you about. Joined today with me is Neif and Dingo. You guys ought to know Dingo because he's not only been on the podcast before, he's been here on the channel before. So, you know, for all the folks watching the premiere today, you've got a returning guest and a new guest. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Good to have you on. Neif is one of these guys who I'm just gonna go out here on a limb and say he's I talked a bit before and I've mentioned before about how I know some people who are the most like pagan non-pagans that I know, or the most pagan non-heathen that I know, and I don't know, but to me, like, Neif is kind of one of those, but I don't know a whole lot about you to say for sure. But there's some things that we're going to be talking about on this podcast that make me think that you got some of that non-traditional views on things, you know?
Right. Yeah, I do. Well, you and I have never, and a lot of people have never really delved into what I studied with history and a lot of religious, if you will, belief.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times it usually sits on top of political belief and standard philosophical belief.
Yeah.
You know,
kind of build it around that sort of thing, I guess.
You know, but I really, you know, I'm a big fan of the show here and watch it as often as I can. And because it is, y'all do provide some pretty wide open, real info about, you know, the history and the religion and the spirituality and what have you. And it's not.
I was going to say actual insight.
Right. It's not just the kitschy, like, yada yada. You know, I don't feel like I'm, you know, reading a comic book or some crap, you know.
Right.
I can actually have a real discussion about life and applicable things when it comes to what this stuff is, and not a comparison of, you know, what.
Well, I think that we can all learn from each other, and that's one of the things that I personally like to pride myself in, is that I can sit and have a conversation with anyone from any walk of life, whether it's, you know, a monotheistic, a polytheistic, an atheistic, and, you know, any kind of religious or non-religious or spiritual view on life, and take something away from their, you know, knowledge that they share, if they so choose, and you know, find where it can apply to me, or see if it does, and but in the same time, it's like, it's knowledge, it's sharing of knowledge, and we can all, I think, benefit from that, you know, in some sort of way.
That's the I agree. That's the that's the core of, well, a lot of, you know, when we get into my beliefs, a lot of the core of it has to do with knowledge and the freedom of knowledge. You know, information should be free. You know, that's an old cyberpunk saying, you know, and it means more than books shouldn't cost money. It means a whole lot more than that. It means that, you know, information should not be a commodity. It should be it should be as abundant as it is. No one should have lack of access to all information. That's, you know, that's what true collectivism is. You know, it's not living as a commune or a community, it is living as a collective when everybody has the same information available to be able to do with that they will, you know.
For sure. I like that. I like that, because one of the things that I've seen arise nowadays, at least in my views on things, and in the kind of circles that I find myself not necessarily running within, but find myself just having an inside view on, is there's too much focus, or there's a hyper awareness or hyper focus of the self and the individual, and not enough of a approach or enough of a care on the community and the family unit, which was so very important to ancient societies, ancient people, you know, before like civilization became just everybody living in a city and, you know, whatever. It was the community was the focus, you know. It was such an integral part of survival and all this kind of stuff, which is going to kind of be what we talk a bit about today. What I wanted to kind of have you on the show to talk about today, in this concept I mentioned in the intro before you came on here about this this notion of Tundra law. Yeah, I think it fits into that.
Yeah,
that whole thing.
There's a little bit. I put that name on the concept, kind of not necessarily in jest, but it's a little more lighthearted, because than one would think, because a lot of these ideals have come from years and years of studying things. I studied a lot of Celtic. I studied some Nordic ruin scriptures and things like that, but my older brother had actually studied more of that. I picked up from that point and started studying more Celtic, derived things, more Irish and Druidic derived things for many years. And I took what I did from that, and then when I began to study a lot more Asian philosophy, and I really became what, if anybody were to ask me now, I just consider myself, for the best explanation, I call myself a Taoist, because it's very, it's a philosophy. It's not a religion, and a lot of people have mistaken me for a Buddhist, which I'm not. I believe that religions have to be practiced. That's one of the things I really respect about a lot of what you guys do, is because I see the practice occurring. And I think that that's the important thing when it comes to religions, because that's what a religion is. It's a daily practice. Whether I believe in it or not, I can believe in someone's faith in their religion by how they practice it.
Yeah.
So, I have respect for people's beliefs more than I just have a broad respect for religion, in general. So I think it, but.
Well, especially with like some of the things that you've studied, they are living religions, like living heathenry, like whether it's Germanic or even Celtic, because of there's bleed over in those continental European countries, and how they became something that Germanic lands kind of adopted or picked up, and they called things maybe a different name, but the fundamentals of it, they were all living beliefs. They didn't necessarily have a name to them. They were just the living thing that the peoples did, right?
Right. It's just,
that's a very Tao perspective, ultimately, right? I mean, it is it is.
Things are how they are.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people think that Confucianism is the opposite of Taoism. It's not really. It's just not as
the more philosophical side. Is that an accurate?
Well, it's odd that Confucius and Sun Tzu actually met each other. Or Lao Tzu, excuse me, I'm talking about Art of War. Lao Tzu, who wrote Tao Te Ching, they actually met, which is very rare for philosophical entities to actually meet each other in the same time.
In that time, it was.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, because all of these figures throughout history were so broadly. But Confucius died with only a couple of devotees. He was run out of pretty much every warlord's village he worked for, because he was trying to breed too much discipline. But he went by the temple, the Taoist temple, and Lao Tzu told him, that he understood what he was trying to do, and he understood, the logic behind it. But he said that, in the Taoist way, life in the universe is going to move. And there's no need to sit and try to perfectly attune everything and fit everything around, because it's going to all wash away when you're gone anyway. And what are you setting these things up for? People say a better life in the future, but you're not, it doesn't, it's not applicable for the time you have here. And it's technically disrespectful for the life you've given to keep thinking ahead past it. That's kind of the thought in Taoism. We believe that almost, any God is able to exist. That's a Taoist belief that,
it's not what you're doing, it's why are you doing it.
And you shouldn't really have very basic reasons. That is where I think the foundation of what I call Tundra law came into it. And I call it Tundra law because it's cold. It is very cold. And it comes from, I was reading, I never finished them. They got several of them, but I was reading a series of fictions written by an archaeological couple that the Greers, I think, is their last name. So Michael Greer and I can't remember his wife's name, but they write separately and they write together, but they write these stories called the First American series. I think it's First American Man or First American. But these are fictions that are based off of the ancient natives of America that crossed the land bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And they start from there and they go all the way. Each story is a different tribe from a different time. And they go expound. And what they've done is their archaeological studies, they would write a story based around where a site that they worked at and the peoples they discovered there. And nobody's going to know this fiction. Nobody, of course, these aren't true because nobody could know. But what they do is they write a story around what they've learned about this culture. So that way it's saying if this happened, this is probably kind of how it would have. And it teaches you more about, I mean, they're really good stories, they got a lot going on in them, but
it's like fiction, but rooted in nonfiction.
Right. It's rooted in, is perceived, and they could be somewhat mistaken, but I mean, these are archaeologists. Things seem to be pretty solid what they talk about, and things will make sense to you, just like a religious text. You read it, you're like, well, that makes sense. It makes perfect sense why they did this and this, they believe this or whatever. So when I was reading a lot of those, some of the earlier ones, when they're actually crossing the land bridge, a lot of people forget. Well, a lot of people know that there's 6 months a night in the northern hemisphere, some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got it's literally just summer and winter.
Right.
You don't really have
people forget that when they're crossing the land bridge, these are people with spears in skins, with nothing, literally nothing, just next to being, a hairless ape with skin wrapped around it because it managed to band together and kill something. Not only are they in the frozen tundra, it is nighttime.
Mm-hmm.
So you are not only cold, but you are dark. And almost everything out there can and will kill you.
Right.
I mean, absolutely.
Unequivocally.
I mean, absolutely.
It wants to.
And the amazing idea that our frail little selves could make it through that is really what I think where religion really foundates itself, because we run into this disbelief that even our own mortality could get past what we got through. And we look to the ancestors and go, how in the hell did y'all manage to do that when we can, I stubbed my fucking toe on a skateboard and I can't goddamn walk for a month.
Right.
I saw a post like that today where somebody's like, my ancestors looking at me after they survived, not being eaten by wild animals and not dying from the elements and building their homes and growing their food, and they're looking at me because my feelings got hurt. And it's just like one of these expressions of like, seriously, like this.
As far as really living up to the ancestors there, people.
Right. You're really doing them a service,
Well, I mean, their feelings in their defense, their feelings probably got hurt too, but 5 seconds later something tried to kill them, so it was like, okay, whatever.
Well, yeah,
really one of those cool things when I talk about Tundra a lot, people think it's so cold because I say, well, when you look at it on a survival level, when it's us three out in the, if we're sitting around arguing about something and things are getting so heated in this world, that people let these arguments just control their lives.
Yeah.
And they don't really stop and think, well, look, if we just took the three of us that are arguing, what if we were all in the middle of the tundra
Right.
right now? What would our argument even matter? Well, first off, probably not shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
That's what it's for. It's about survival.
right, because now, am I still going to be pissed at you two for whatever? No, because we need to build a fucking fire because we're going to freeze to death. And when I say we, I do mean we. And that's the other part of it, is it's a situation that forces you into understanding what real social interaction is. You know,
Yeah, it's none of this. Oh man, sending thoughts, sending prayers. If you need anything, and I mean anything, just call me. And then you call them, and like you don't get any answers, or they don't respond to your messages or your texts or whatever. There's like that's the whole thing about like this social media construct, the social media age. It's given the illusion of camaraderie, and it's given the illusion of togetherness when like, hey, look, like there's ways that people can connect over long distances nowadays better than ever before, and that's a thing, but it does never, and it could never replace, because here's the thing too, like what you're talking about, Neif, is like this Tundra law and relying on each other and having to do it. There's a level of trust that has to be there amongst each other, and that's what, like with heathens, we look at as the term frith. Frith is not just about being cool with each other and being friendly and having a good time. Frith is about this. There's trust involved, and there's obligation in inherently in that mentality, because without that, you're done. Like as an individual, you're screwed. Right. Because without the tribe, without that, togetherness, without that community, you're left to the wild, as it were.
Right. I think one of the things that, and I picked up watching a lot of what y'all talk about, and I heard the term come back, and I had not heard it in years. And I know that I learned it from probably from the Nordic stuff I'd studied way back. And it was about the two selves, the smaller case and the higher, the lower self and the higher self. And I've heard y'all mention that before. And I was like, that's another big thing. And lots of religions have that same concept. But if I remember correctly, I know that I guess it was in the Nordic stuff that I studied, in the Odinism, do they refer to it as a higher and a lower self?
There's the concept of the self is pretty complex, and it's not even just a higher and lower. It's multidimensional. There's layers of the self that extend into just. Right. So it's multidimensional. It's pretty complex, but
it might have been. It probably is where I picked that up. Just the term like that, because that's what I think of when I'm thinking all those years back. But that's one of those things that nowadays, especially, at the same time, people are quote unquote getting more aware or more, I guess, able to use the terms. They tend to be more fluid. You know what I mean? People are immediately, everybody is so selfishly selfless. You know what I mean? It's like a virtue. It's a virtue. It's a virtue signal. It's basically saying, look how much I care. Why don't you care as much as me?
Wow.
And it's, it really,
like it's a competition or something,
right.
Like it's more about pride than it is about
it's about driving someone else to, it's kind of like, it's a manipulation tactic to get you to believe what I want you to believe. Why don't you think like me? I only think the way I do because I'm completely selfless about this thought. So I don't understand why you don't agree with me. You see what I'm saying? Whereas if somebody says, well, I believe this way and it's partially because of my own gain, you're like, well, I don't have to believe it. I can understand why you wouldn't agree with it because it's for my gain. But people turn it and say, I believe this because it's got nothing to do with the benefit of me. So therefore, it has to be correct. And if you disagree with me, then you obviously don't give a shit and have no empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I think that especially like nowadays, I was gonna bring up something, and for the sake of the podcast and for the sake of our audience, and you and Dingo and stuff as guests and friends, I think it'd be kind of a fun thing. Like this past weekend, I went and got I'm fully vaccinated, and the whole COVID thing is a big hot topic for a lot of people. When you talk about vaccination versus non-vaccination, is it worth getting now? And there's friends of mine, not just here, but friends of mine that are like still stuck on the idea or the concept that it's well, we haven't done enough testing, and I see all those things to know whether or not it's safe, and I see all those things, and I look and I say, well, look, here's why I think it's worth doing, but I also understand why people think it's not worth doing, and at the end of the day, people are gonna, I guess, think what they want to think and do what they want to do anyway. But in this light, like this is one of those things where you were talking about earlier, Neif, like, okay, we're all sitting around a fire, or we're all sitting around and we're having an argument. Like this could be one of those things where we're like, well, we're gonna get into a friendly debate or a discussion about something, but at the end of the day, what does it really matter?
Right.
Because I feel like it's something that for the good of the people around us, as long as you've done your due diligence to make sure that it's not going to hurt the people around you, then why wouldn't you do it? Because it could only it could reduce the infection rate, reduce the spread. So far as we know right now, what do we know? What are we going to know in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road? Well, who the hell knows where I'm going to be at that point? I know that I'm here right now, and there's the involvement with the people that I'm with around now, and what we want to accomplish in the here and now. It plays into the decision making process. So, but is it going to change? Unless people just get like downright ridiculous and stupid in their concepts or their ideas about it, is it going to change anything about my friends or who I'm friends with? Most likely not, right? Because again, at the end of the day, what does it really matter? Like, what are we doing to build each other up in that community mindset?
Right.
And how do we accomplish that under the current climate of the world,
Right.
with, a virus that is, created a pandemic in the last year and a half. So.
Right.
Well, I mean, you were talking about like people just like going reckless, like you have those people like going around, grocery stores, like licking fruit and stuff like that. And it's like,
what is up with that? Anyway?
I don't care if there's a pandemic or not. I don't be doing that. That's not, no.
I thought they quit that remember a couple of years ago with the ice cream, and people were getting prison time for that?
Yeah.
Because when they put it back in the case, they told them, well, by law, you put it back into the case. We don't know which one it is. Even if it's on camera, we don't know which one it is. And every single one of those products has to be pulled out of there, and you owe us for them all.
At the very least, monetary speaking, just,
Then they started hitting them on a felony because it was like, contamination of a food source, or just some crazy borderline terrorist charge.
Right? Yeah, like biological warfare or something.
And all of a sudden, a couple people got hit hard for it, and we're like, "Oh, but I was just joking."
Yeah,
they weren't.
Nobody's laughing.
Yep.
And that's the kind of ridiculous stupidity that I'm talking about. Like, if you're just going to be like being so reckless and have no care for the safety or the like, you're just not a decent human being. First of all, you're just an asshole if you're going to do stuff like that. Again, pandemic aside or whatever. Like,
right.
Like, would you walk up to somebody and arbitrarily just spit in their mouths, thinking that it's funny? Well, are you not in a sense doing just that when you're contaminating their food? Like, come on.
Yeah. It's just, but that's the thing is, you run into such a broad, so many people. Like Fear said, there's too many of us. There's too many of us. There's just too many of us, And that's where, I get into a lot of debates with people about anarchism. And I definitely don't like to put the ism on it, just like Rasta. It's
Mhm.
things aren't an ism. The whole point is that it's not an ism. It's not dealing with that BS. And people say, well, how is that going to work? How would it work to shut everything down? I never said it would.
Right.
It's not a system that we're replacing with this all I'm saying is that what happening now does not. And it will eventually collapse in a horrible way unless it's dismantled properly.
Yeah.
So, but as long as you have, like people say, as long as you have people like that, then you have people that can justify needing law enforcement. And that's when you can get into a very deep discussion about society, the structure of society, technology. I mean, if we were growing our own food, we would only have to worry about somebody jumping the fence and messing with it. We wouldn't have to worry about somebody going into the grocery store because there wouldn't be a grocery store.
Right.
Yeah,
the world's become such a big place, and it's. I mean, I was looking at something the other day when we talk about technology and how far things have advanced. Like if you look at like the primary method of transportation for thousands of years was like the chariot, or the horse and buggy, and then all of a sudden the automobile hit, and then within like 60 years, within like a human's lifespan, you had airplanes, and we were going to the moon, and and space travel and all that kind of stuff, like within a century, well within a century. Like I think back on like my grandparents and even my great grandparents who lived at a time where all of those things happened while they were still alive, and just seeing that just hurdle, just that launch into vast changes of things when the world was such a simpler. It really was. It was a simpler time, not all that long ago.
Yep.
And did we grow up too fast? Did we move?
The Industrial Revolution thought, just like the agricultural revolution, it never stopped. I mean, agriculture never stopped, but it as a revolution did. Industry never stopped, but it as a revolution did. Now we are at the end of the failed information revolution, and many people were never told that in the 90s. They straight up said the Industrial Revolution is done. We are entering into an information revolution because communication got big and telecommunication went apeshit. I always say that it failed because we've commoditized info, and it is completely less than free. It's so unfree now.
Oh yeah,
that you're getting ripped off for information you're not paying for. You know what I'm saying?
Just look back at, look at, if you were to, just try to find anything online, look at how much stuff is open sourced, meaning you don't have to pay for it. You don't have to own a license for it. You know what I mean? It's just there for the taking. Yep.
All about the canoe.
Just there for the taking.
That was the whole idea of the Linux movement when it came to the software and technology, was that everything should be open source.
Well,
there was a famous story about the original team that worked on the original Linux design, Linus and all that. They were working for Microsoft, and Gates said you have to have company-wide a password on your account because we need to beef up security. And they're like, what security? Like, it's all in the building, dude. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so a lot of these guys put spacebar. They put spacebar as their password. And that was it. Like, it was just blank space, and that it had to be something. It had to be some value. So they did that, and that's it,
Yeah, it just had to take up, X amount of
and they kind of broke off and were like, fuck this, we're gonna do our own thing, and we're gonna make our own system that is free to everybody, because they saw that move alone as turning all of this into a commodity rather than
they knew technology. They knew that the Unix platform which was based out of hard, C structure, was far superior than the net framework that Microsoft was trying to run under, which they had stolen from Xerox. But the big thing was, and that's a huge one right there, because you look at Macintosh is a Unix based system. There's only one. People talk about viruses now. Now viruses, they talk about malware, which isn't a real virus, and a lot of those things aren't real viruses in computers. The only computers that ever got viruses were Windows.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep. And then Norton was born, and a whole lot of money was made from it.
Right, and they're the only ones that needed antivirus software.
Yeah.
And now Windows has it built in. Norton doesn't exist. They pretty much are absorbed in, and
And it sucks. And my system I run on Linux is just fine no matter what.
And it never finds anything wrong on Windows. You never find any. It always pops up.
Right.
The vendor never finds anything. Well, of course, because y'all ain't put anything in here.
Right.
But Linux is. Unix in general is what it is. Linux is just
right.
The standard term that Linus developed that to be a user-friendly version of Linux, and then Linux just kerneled out, and you have all the distros you have now.
Right.
I think it's really interesting how the where we kind of went in from the initial discussion about this Tundra law. I think it really fits a lot into even this type of thing, because when it comes down to it, anything that's this freely these commodities, so much is open sourced. What understanding are people nowadays, people that are coming into this world, the young people coming into this world, what understanding are they getting from the world they live in? How are they learning about the importance of tribe, the importance of community, the importance of the people around you, instead of just being this lone ranger out here, just again, just doing their own thing, being their own and making it, because that's the world that's the way the world is. You can just be your own entrepreneur. You know what I mean?
It's kind of
which is interesting. It's kind of neat in a way, but at the same time, it's like with these inherent values that are value, they're valuable. They're necessary, I think.
Relating to that, and like we were talking about technology, like I just thought of an interesting analogy. Like when I was growing up, right, like we had video games and everything, but like if you didn't own that game, then you had to go to the rental place and rent it. And like today, you hear all the time stories about my 5-year-old racked up $500 worth of freemium stuff on my cell phone, and I'm all mad about it, and blah, 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 blah. If I had tried to rack up $500 at the video store when I was growing up, they wouldn't have had that. Like,
first off,
there would have been a conversation with my parents. Like, there would have been this whole community thing involved, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that same similar thing, the video store up the street from my house, the owner, he's a real cool dude. And when I'd go rent my Nintendo games, you'd rent them and they had the due date, but you knew you're going to keep them longer. So it wasn't really a late fee. You were just paying for more days.
Right.
So I'd keep it for a week or two, and I'd bring it back, and he would give me a deal. He'd be like, "Oh, you owe me, such and such. I'll tell you what, just give me, because he was making his money, and he knew,
he
knew that.
Castlevania 2, I rented so many times that they just gave it to me.
Look,
man, you know what? We'll just get another copy.
Yeah, you paid for like 17 of these games already. Right?
Yeah, right.
You've earned it,
It's got my wife's oil change, man. Thanks.
Right.
I think that and another thing I was thinking too about when we were talking about the wild and how you're at its mercy, man. Like there's no, it goes back to just like you say Tundra law. People talk about the law of the jungle, or like, man, that's how the wild is, and even in like a heathen context, and it's not necessarily an old heathen idea, at least not in linguistic form, but there's this Innengard, Utengard, the inner yard, the outer yard. Ancient people just understood that when you were inside the confines of, whether it was, the tribe, or you were inside the gates, the walls, the groves, whatever, like there was safety inside that. Outside, because there were rules, there was rules, but to the extent that there was a construct, and there was a social construct that everyone agreed to and abided while they were within. All that stuff that happens outside, man, it runs on its own engine, you know what I'm saying? And you can't go out there and control it. It's like, I look at it in a way of like, you ever have property and you're, mowing your yard, well, you've got a boundary and you've got everything beyond that. It grows up. And if you let it grow too far, it starts spreading into your inner space, your inner circles, your inner yard, like the literal yard space. And that's like a metaphor to me, in the sense, like, you got to know where those boundaries are, and you have some control and you have some say in what happens within your inner circles, within your inner yards. And that's like, I think, Neif, we've talked about, or at least alluded to it sometimes, about tribe versus cult. Maybe that was another person I was having conversation with, but I think that was you.
I think
that was a rhetoric rabbit hole episode.
Yeah, it might have been, because everybody that, if like Neif, he's been on, you produce the Rhetoric Rabbit Hole podcast. So, he's on there all the time.
I'm on there more than
on there. Yeah.
I'm supposed to just be producing it, but
you got your hands in that cookie jar big time.
Yeah, I got to talk about shit all the
time. but right. So but to what extent where the lines? And I think the cult mentality or cult views on things has changed drastically over time. It wasn't always what it is now, and it just kind of went off the rails, probably pretty recently, actually, if in comparison. But there's I don't know what I was trying to say, but like the rules or the regulations or the laws, the bylaws, the thu, as the traditions, those things exist and they work within. Doesn't apply out there, man. It doesn't outside in the tundra, in the wild, in the jungle, man. It's, you try telling a wolf that's charging you, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. That's...
Okay, what? That ain't happening, man.
Right. And there's no, justification. It doesn't exist, really. Yeah. Or it is already covered. It's everything is justified because everything is allowed. Animals kill each other to eat each other to protect themselves out of fear. And they don't tend to usually kill to protect themselves out of fear if they can get away. But there's certain grounds. I've seen some pretty amazing stuff. Growing up, one of the things that I watched a lot, fortunately, I say this, of course, when I was coming up, I couldn't stand it, but, my folks didn't get cable. They wouldn't get cable TV, and it was pretty commonplace, even as old as I am, it was pretty commonplace. It was a big thing coming up to, in my time, MTV was huge, it was still showing music,
Yeah.
But so what it did is it stuck me into only being able to watch network stuff or stuff on the UHF, but also PBS. And I'm not a big fan of PBS as an entity anymore, or so much as I used to be, but
do they even still exist? Is public broadcasting even still a thing?
Yeah.
Do they really? They still do that? Wow. I didn't even know.
It's NPT now.
Yeah. Well, that's
National Public Television.
That's Nashville. So you have it's done like NPR is. You have your federal branch of that feeds everybody money, and then you have each state has a whatever.
Right.
But it's But anywho, so I watched a lot of these nature shows, and what amazed me from back in the day watching like Nova and some of the older shows that they were using the highest tech equipment they had at the time, the most trained people they had at the time, out there trying to learn about these animals. It was amazing stuff. But one of the coolest things that I've noticed through the years is continuing to watch that stuff and watch how much technology has advanced our ability to gain knowledge and all those animal biologists and, just zoologists and what have you, that go risk their ass just to tell us about a tiger,
Right.
And,
yeah, because what was it back then? It was like, the telescopic zoom lenses from a half a mile away.
Mounted on a Jeep, hoping a rhino didn't charge the fucking Jeep,
Right.
There's very little communication, no, cell phone.
And it was pretty ruthless by today's standards too. Like you saw like a lion rip the throat out of a zebra or something like.
Well, that's visceral.
Is but one thing that I started to see was they started to get more cameras in more places and get to see animals when they aren't realizing they're being looked at. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And more, they thought they understood the complete behaviors of certain things, and then they found abnormalities. And then they started to find that, there's just as many odd, abnormal behaviors that go on in the animal kingdom as in the human kingdom. We just tend to point them out and treat them in a certain way, whereas the animal kingdom, it just happens, and
elephants having funerals,
right? Things like that.
Things like that, yeah.
Well, and and then you've got things like that just seem very similar to like the monkeys that the apes that travel across to eat all the fruit and freak out and have sex in the trees for a day, and then they just go back to where they were, and
it's Woodstock, baby.
I was gonna say that doesn't sound like that was the 60s, wasn't it?
Well, but one of the things that I saw not too long ago, and this really blew my mind, it was a lion, was chasing these two, let's say it was either hyenas or cheetahs, away from its territory. And it kind of, bucked at them, and they kind of ran back a little bit. And they said it was a brother and sister. And they kind of crept up on it again, and then it took off at them. And the lion ran the brother down in cold blood. And they said they've never witnessed this, because animals, for one thing, big cats don't eat each other. Mm. Cat meat is not really something that things try to go and eat, And cats will attack each other in defense, and they will smack each other the hell out of their land, but animals don't tend to ruthlessly run each other down just to murder one, unless it wants to eat it, unless it fit, and they said there's a very, very abnormal behavior. And they said, animal psychologists were talking about it, and they said they think that it might very well have been because you have things like, hyenas and cheetahs, these wars that go on, these predator wars between each other, because that's what they are. They're fighting over their area to hunt, will go in and kill young. And they say that it's a possibility that this lion was a survivor of a litter that got pretty much killed by I can't remember if it was cheetahs or it was a couple of cheetahs or it was hyenas.
But hyenas are the lion's bane, man. Like they're always
and that's why I wanted to say that, but it seems like I remember it being cheetahs, because they all have craziness going on between each other,
Right.
And they said that that's the only thing they could think is that it psychologically that lion snapped. Was like, because they're like, it's not going to eat it. It wasn't an actual real threat to it. It didn't run up at it. This thing ran it off, and then it got to a point where they said it should, at most, all of them will stop at about this point and turn and run back, and whoever takes
carry on. Yeah.
But he didn't. He just kept going, and they were like, what the hell is this? And he mauled this damn thing. And they say they see more stuff like that now because they have more video footage available. They just got more cameras, drones, all kind of shit,
Yeah.
Well, and you see that in domesticated animals as well,
Well,
I want to say it was my dad told me a story about this dog that he knew that somebody he knew had, and it was a rescue dog, and it was terrified of people wearing sunglasses.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty common. I mean, a lot of
And if
dogs.
you like took your sunglasses off, it would stop freaking out. But if you had them on, it would go ape shit.
There's a lot of
And it turns out that the previous owner beat it, and he wore mirrored sunglasses all the time.
And I mean, that's pretty common with domestication, because like I always say, as one of the one of the rules of Tundra law, one must realize that the most domesticated animals on this earth are humans.
Yeah.
We have more successfully domesticated ourselves than we ever will any other fucking creature.
Yeah.
And that's part of what domestication is teaching that wildness away and giving it emotional response, you know. And it's so much domestication is absolutely useless on the tundra. You know,
I thought that it was talking about domesticating people away and the responses that we have. I saw something that made me think about this conversation, or potentially what this conversation could lead to. And I think it fits. It's like, like Neif, you were talking about the collapse of society and anarchy and its application, or whether it works and this and that. But like, think about it, right? Should or when it's, because it's inevitable, society collapse. Like, what's the first thing that we see nowadays? People are talking about, stock up on your guns and ammunition and things to kill each other with.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why aren't we putting more focus on learning those
tools,
primal tools, like building, like knowing what the heck to do to survive, not how to destroy further, but how to live.
Right.
Like, because I don't know, I had the fortune of growing up in a way that was still in modern time, but I worked on a farm for over a decade. I was growing food in a garden. We were raising and slaughtering our own domestic cattle, chickens, the whole bit, farm life, and went hunting, fishing, knew how to identify what are edible things that grow and what are dangerous, how to build a shelter, like all these various things, where to find clean water, how to filter water, all this kind of stuff. That's what you need to know when, crap hits the fan and everything just turns to garbage, not how to, put a bullet through somebody's eye. Now, granted, part of I think, like you would maybe agree, part of Tundra law, part of this whole thing is survival, right? So yeah, there's a
Security,
level
protection.
Of that. Yeah.
You have to have at least a big as gun as your enemy.
Right. You got to know how to defend your keep.
Right.
You know what I mean? You got to know how to defend your tribe and all
advocate
that.
As I am an advocate of not being outgunned.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you don't use a gun to kill an ant.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't waste that bullet.
Right. I mean,
I think people watch too much TV. They see all these.
It's about resource.
Right.
They watch these post-apocalyptic movies. They get in this, Mad Max mentality or something. I don't know, maybe, that's what it's going to be like, and we're all going to be,
Well, really, I don't know. If you're talking about like pop culture, Walking Dead would probably be the closest, and I always appreciated the crossbow and the katana, because that's a reusable weapon. Like,
one of the things that it's funny you mentioned,
it's about resource,
is in all actuality, the very first one is a simulation of what would begin to happen. Now, Road Warrior, after the fact, and it gets a little wild because of that, and Beyond Thunderdome is what it is, and then the new that came out is what it is,
right?
But
the original is one people don't talk about.
Yeah, the very original one is basically where it is. It's Australia if the Northern Hemisphere had nuclear war. And they know it happened. They know it's about to happen, or they know it's happening. And they realize we're about all that's left. Why do we give a shit anymore? And so there's hardly anybody that wants to be a cop. Main Force Patrol is what Mad Max comes from, and they're like roughneck cops, because they're basically gang hunters trying to just run around and keep nomad gangs from terrorizing everybody, doing whatever the fuck they can to do it. So it's really this weird you know, they're not real like cops. They're like,
Yeah.
you know,
And again, it kind of goes back to, in a way, it goes back to what I was saying earlier was like, there's law, there's order, there's something that exists because especially like if we take it from like a heathen view, right? You got the Aesir gods, the Vanir gods, and you've got the Jotun, right? It's order versus chaos. The way that Germanic people and the way that these, societies knew things would work is that there had to be order, there had to be structure, there had to be things in place. And it wasn't like, you had this overarching government that said what to do and how to do it. It's you had that structure, and you had a
food,
hierarchy.
Fire.
Yeah, but there was also yeah, exactly. There were those basic things, but within that society, there was like, well, the blacksmith isn't going to do what the farrier does because that's what the farrier does, and the leather worker's not going to do what the seamstress does because that's what the seamstress does, and the chieftain's not going to do what the war chief does, but you know what I'm saying? Like everybody had their role, everybody knew their role, and there was a respect and a structure to those respective roles in that society, and that's where I think the level of order should exist within a tribe and within that societal structure, as it were.
And that's where a lot of people confuse anarchism with chaos, because anarchism truly just means the anti-archon. You don't, there's not. It doesn't mean not having a leader. It means I'm not going to have somebody else tell me who my leader is for some shit that I didn't make a decision that I'm going to go do in the first place.
Yeah.
If I am not as good of a hunter as Dingo, but I'm the head of figuring out if I was, the head of figuring some shit out, I'd be like, well,
I'll do this because I'm good at it.
Yeah.
And that's what the tribe has deemed me as being.
I'm good at delegating responsibility because I know who's good at doing what, and I know he's better at doing that. So I'm going to ask him about that, but a lot of that comes from the displacement of ego and how that's taught in being raised.
Yeah. And that's where I like to go back to some myth type things like Arthurian legend and stuff. The whole concept of this round table, right? Where there was we were all equals. We were all peers. Obviously the king is the king. Right. But at the table, the king doesn't pull rank, right? Everybody gets to say their piece and everybody has their say, and ideas and stuff are welcome. And that's, I think, is probably the most holistic example of how a society can work with leaders without being that displaced ego we talked about.
Right. And there's a place for every man at the table. I explained to Alex about the inner concept of the round table of, when you rule your home or your life, you are at the head of your own round table. And too many people want to elongate the table and not make it round, make it a big dinner table and try to place people in areas, because of a rank. And that's reflective. People pick up on that. Yeah. And I like to try to keep things on the level of the seating has to do with public or day to day. Like I work a lot with Alex with Rabbit Hole. He and I talk a lot about a lot of different things, concepts of the shows, and he is very close to me at my table. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean he is closer to me spiritually or emotionally than, say, one of my brothers who is further across the table.
Yeah.
Because it's not that he's further away from me any way other than physically. And in the world, how the world sees. People see me next to the people that I'm around. You guys are closer to that side because I can be associated with you guys a little more commonly. I talk to you guys a little more often, things like that. So that's how I always viewed that is in placement, and people never, it makes it a lot easier to understand the egoless concept where you're going, well, I don't have a best friend. I don't like bests. I don't like favorite, this and that, you know. And it's kind of crazy because that kind of concept, when you drive it hard enough into yourself, it bleeds over to everything. I mean, I truly don't feel like I have favorites when it comes to things. People ask my favorite food and you know, favorite band. I mean, I know my favorite band is me, but but you know.
Yeah, I think the whole like positioning around the table, like we look at some examples in specific branches of heathenry, and sometimes this particular approach to heathenry gets a lot of negative press, but Thadish heathens are typically pretty militant in their ideas, and they're pretty much also mostly Saxon heathens. But you got to think about like the regional culture at the time. It was a very war based culture, right? So you had your kings, and the kings had their thanes, and they all had positions for a specific reason, and it was, again, just like a cultural thing. I think nowadays for the modern heathen tribe, and then this is just my perception of it, like we don't live in, there's no need for the warband culture to exist, practically speaking, like in the same way that it did in ancient times. I don't want to say like not the literal king, but like the not hypothetical. What's the word? Like, it's a word I'm trying to think of. Not the literal king, but like the figure in that tribe, the figure in that collective has a position, but it's ceremonial, I guess, is probably the best term I'm thinking of it for it, because they have a position for that moment. But in the day-to-day stuff, like you were saying, just because this guy sits closer to me at that moment, or that it doesn't mean anything beyond just the formalities of it, or the ceremony of it, as it were.
You don't call an electrician to fix your toilet.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, shoot. I mean, like Neif has said to me before, he's like, it's like, if I want to do some, bone splitting, earth crushing doom, you're the guy I'm going to call. If I want to do some hip hop, I mean, you ain't the guy, man. Like, I mean, right?
You're good at what you do, but that ain't
Dingo's not rolling around in his bed crying because I didn't hit him up for the hip hop session.
Right? Yeah. Like,
I thought you thought I could play.
Right? Yeah.
That's a big thing too today. We'll be wrapping.
But yeah, if you want me to destroy your house foundation, I'm down with that. If you want to
demolition, man.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's I guess people like to have a place. Maybe not everybody, but people like to have a place, and like if they can't find a place to be in, they like to make their own place, and it's But that's the other thing too, is when you talk about tribe, and when you talk about establishing boundaries and establishing a structure, like a society within society, you don't call yourself anything. That those titles, those roles and stuff, those are things that are put on you by the people with whom you share existence with, because they're the ones that look at you and go, well, that's the one who's worth having those responsibilities. Worth is placed on us by our people, right? And that's where the whole hierarchy comes into place. It's not that I'm the Gothi, or I'm the chieftain, or I'm the king because I say so. It's because the people have spoken, and they determine that he, she, I, whatever, are the best persons to fit that role. And then comes the responsibility and the obligation that you have to live up to that title or live up to that role, and not just wear it like a with a false sense of dignity or false sense of privilege, right? Because that's a thing. But yeah, that
right.
I don't know. This Tundra law thing has really got me thinking how it fits into heathenry. It's the wild is going to eat you up, man. They'll get you, and they don't care.
Oh, no. I mean, they care.
You better put your best hunter on the job.
Yeah. you know, because ego don't make meat taste no better.
Nope.
Right.
Nope. Nope. The wolves don't care how much gold you have or how handsome you are or, you know, how good you can sing and all this other kind of stuff, man. They're just like, that's food. That's
As a matter of fact, they would probably prefer you be pretty lazy and slow and big.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Big old juicy.
Yeah.
Big old juicy one.
That's pre-tenderized.
Aaron, we just scam and just fall out. We didn't have to.
I mean, that's what we want. That's what we did on the farm, man. We didn't when we were bringing animals in to prepare for slaughter, man, we didn't want them running around the field or even walking. We brought them into a little, you know, barn with a, you know, a 10 by 10, 12 by 12 box. And the biggest exercise they got was walking from one box 10 feet across to the next box just so we could muck them out. And then we moved them back in. And that was the most exercise that they got. And they gained like, you know, 200-300 pounds in 4 weeks. Because that's all they did. They just stood, slept, ate, and that's it. That's what you want.
Yeah.
For a good meal. You want the slow, the fat, the lazy.
You know, like the Kobe cattle and keep them drunk and massage them.
Yeah, buddy. Well, I think that's going to about wrap it up for us today, guys.
Awesome.
We're about at time, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. Thanks, Dingo, first of all, for, you know, being a surprise guest. Thank you, Neif, for, you know, tuning in and first of all, supporting the podcast, but being a guest here. Maybe we do it again sometime, you know. Would love to have you back on here. So, you know, for everybody listening and watching, please, you know, let us know what you think. This is going to be, you know, this is premiering live on YouTube. So let us know what you guys think in the comments and the live chat. And for all the, you know, podcast listeners, vote the podcast up, check the show notes for all the other fun stuff that we post up there. Every Thursday morning, these things come out. So, you know, if you like it, let us know and we'll keep bringing it out here to you. So thank you again, guys. And we'll talk again soon. So
thank you. Y'all have a good one.
Yeah, man.
All right.